Imagine waking up in a hospital, vulnerable and in pain, trusting that the nurse by your bedside is there to help you and treat you. But unfortunately, the nurse by your bedside is there to take your life. Charles Cullen, who was dubbed the Angel of Death, confessed to killing dozens, maybe even hundreds of patients over the span of 2 decades. You can ask this question: how did he evade capture for so long? And why did no one stop him? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the twisted mind of a man who used medicine as his weapon. Charles Cullen, who was a registered nurse, spent over 16 years working across multiple hospitals and medical facilities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Initially, he was seen as a dedicated and soft-spoken caregiver. However, he used that period to quietly and systematically commit one of the most prolific killing histories and killing spree in American history. He was eventually dubbed the Angel of Death for his habit of ending lives that he was supposed to preserve, an unfathomable betrayal in a profession that was founded on trust and compassion. Cullen would ultimately confess to killing at least 40 patients, though estimates suggest that the real number could be far higher, possibly even reaching into the hundreds. He killed his patients by administering lethal doses of medications like digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine. And he usually administered these medications to patients who were already on their way to recovery or who had already recovered. He was able to avoid detection despite leaving a trail of unexplained deaths and code blues emergency in his wake. When suspicions finally arose, it wasn't because of a formal investigation or proactive hospital action, but due to the persistence of a small group of colleagues who noticed disturbing patterns in his patients' records. The case of Charles Cullen is more than just a prolific and horrific true crime story. It stands as a monumental failure in medical ethics, hospital oversight, and patient safety. Cullen's ability to move from one hospital to another without triggering any formal scrutiny highlighted profound issues in healthcare system internal controls. Hospitals, fearful of lawsuits or reputational damage, often failed to report their suspicions to regulatory authorities. Instead, they allowed Cullen to resign quietly and find employment elsewhere, which was a very, very terrible thing to do. This case has sparked intense discussion around medical ethics, as Cullen's unchecked killing sprees exposed how the very institution that was entrusted to human lives can eventually harm us. It forced healthcare facilities to re-examine their hiring protocols and implement stricter practices for tracking patient outcomes, and also to address systemic issues that allowed Cullen's crime to go unnoticed for a very long time. Additionally, the case underscored the critical need for transparent reporting and accountability within hospitals, a lack of which can even allow the most obvious warning signs to go unnoticed or ignored, putting patients at catastrophic risk. Ultimately, the story of Charles Cullen serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of medical oversight and the dire consequences that can unfold when these strategies fail. It has left a lasting impact on the policies surrounding patient safety, prompting reforms designed to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This case raises troubling questions about potential harm within the system designed to heal and the dangerous gaps that can arise when ethical boundaries are ignored. Charles Cullen's background offers unsettling insights into his psyche, shaped by early troubled life, mental health struggles, and a path through healthcare which he would later commit multiple murders. There's a detailed breakdown of his upbringing, his family life, his mental health struggle, and his medical career. But before we get into that, hey everyone, my name is Chichi. I am a physiotherapist and I'm a true crime enthusiast. And in this channel, we're going to be talking about medical true crime, medical mystery, and medical history. So if it is something you like, please relax, and let's get into the video. Charles Cullen's childhood, to put it simply, was incredibly rough. He was born on the 22nd of February 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey, and he was the youngest of 8 children. Family wasn't just poor, it was very unstable, and it was marked by a lot of chaos. His father Edmund died when Charles was still 7 months old, leaving his mother Florence to raise 8 kids on her own. Yes, you heard me right, 8 children. And I mean, it wasn't exactly the nurturing environment you would hope for, because Florence, even though she tried, she couldn't really provide the emotional support Charles needed, and this left him feeling abandoned from a very early age. From the outside, he might have looked like just another shy, lonely kid, someone who struggled to make friends, someone who found solace in isolation, but that wasn't just the case of a normal childhood introversion, because Charles was often bullied at high school and there was no one to protect him because his father was already late and his mom was quite busy. The kind of emotional neglect that he had, kind of sticks, and it is hard to shake off when you're just a kid. On top of everything, the family dynamics was just very tough. Even though they were Irish Catholic, you know, it could have helped a little bit, but it didn't, because many of Charles' siblings couldn't even step into that fatherly role for him. They were deeply into substances and sometimes they even sold from their bedrooms. The sisters, they got pregnant too, out of wedlock, and often with partners who weren't exactly, great influences to Charles. Charles actually tried to poison one of his sister's boyfriend one time. I mean, it didn't work out, but it is clear he didn't get along with them. It wasn't just a teenage, anguish or angst. It was something deeper, especially when you look at how unstable and irresponsible the family around him was. At 17 years old, the most defining blow to Charles' life came when his mother died in a car accident. It was a very, very horrible time for him then. And he was at school when his school administrators pulled him out of class to suddenly break this horrific news to him. You can imagine suddenly losing the only person who truly supported you, the only person who made him feel like he had a place in this chaotic world. Florence had been his emotional rock, and without her, it felt like everything just fell apart. And after that, he couldn't hold things together anymore. He dropped out of high school, and his mental health spiraled. It was like he was lost. He had no family. His siblings, it was like they weren't there, and there was no stability. And that was when the struggles gradually began to kick in. Meanwhile, Cullen's mental health struggles began early in life. At the age of 9, he already attempted unaliving himself by drinking chemicals from a chemistry set, an early indicator of despair and psychological turmoil. Throughout his adolescence and adulthood, he exhibited self-destructive tendencies, repeatedly attempting to remove himself from the surface of Earth. By his own admission, he felt a sense of fated loneliness and he experienced feelings of worthlessness, and it was quite overwhelming. After his mother's passing away, Colin's mental health wasn't significantly. He continued to struggle with depression, suicidal ideation, and other psychological symptoms that led to multiple psychiatric hospitalizations for him. His psychological state became even more volatile as he entered adulthood, which I think is very, very typical. As a child, if you had a very volatile childhood, there are chances of it becoming much more higher as you get older. Just like I said earlier, he repeatedly tried to off himself, and this disturbing behavior alarmed those that were around him. For example, he admitted to breaking into a co-worker's home to observe her without her knowledge. This was later in life. An action that was suggesting an increasingly fractured sense of boundary and control. Mental health professionals diagnosed him with severe depression and potentially other conditions, although the specifics of his diagnosis are not entirely clear. He's frequently prescribed medication and administered to psychiatric facilities, yet he continued to spiral downward, becoming increasingly detached from reality and embracing a worldview marked by despair, anguish, and resentment. After losing both of his parents, his dad when he was just a few months old, and his mom as a teenager, Cullen was pretty lost. And honestly, I mean, who wouldn't be? So in 1978, looking for some sort of escape and structure, he joined the US Navy. I am not sure if he finished high school, but I think so. Because for you to join US Navy, I think you have to finish high school. And for you to even become a nurse, you have to finish high school. So in the US Navy, he trained as a missile technician, which is not a small thing. I mean, it's a job that's meant to be responsible for repairing, operating, and maintaining missile weapons, and it requires serious precision and focus. On the surface, this probably seemed like a great decision for someone who has been struggling his entire life. But there's one thing. Colin's issue didn't just disappear because he put on a uniform. I mean, his time in the Navy was filled with erratic, bizarre behavior, and it wasn't even long before people around him started noticing that there is something off about him. There was one incident, for example, where he dressed up in a surgical gown and mask on the submarine. You can imagine that someone who was supposed to be a missile technician, you're serving on a submarine, cramped with your crew, and you just see this guy walking around like he's about to perform surgery. I don't know, but it's quite funny to me. I mean, it's not quirky, but it's an alarming situation. So his superiors, they were really concerned, and his colleagues were weirded out. And the Navy finally decided he wasn't fit for service after so many experiences they had with him. So after several disciplinary issues and actions, Colin was medically discharged in 1984. At this point, you would think he'd be out of options, right? No, he's actually a very, very ambitious person. He's an ambitious man because surprisingly, he turned his attention to nursing. He was probably out of trying to find purpose or maybe even a connection to his mom because he lost his mom in an accident. So he enrolled in Mount Sinai School of Nursing in New Jersey, the same hospital where his mom passed. And you know what's even more surprising? He actually thrived there. For the first time, Colin seemed to fit in. He studied hard, he made friends, and allegedly he was also the president of his class. Is wild to think that because of this same guy that struggled in the Navy was, performing excellently in nursing school, but I guess he seemed to have it together. In 1987, Cullen graduated from the Mount Sinai Hospital School of Nursing in Montclair, New Jersey. Nothing gave him what he'd been looking for, a stable career, which he couldn't find from his family or from his sibling. But this is where things begin to get more chilling. This job gave him opportunity to exert control over people who were completely vulnerable, aka his patients. And we know now that this is not a man who wants to be in control of anyone's life at all. During his time in nursing school, Colin met a woman named Adrienne Bayum, sorry if I'm murdering the name, while he was working many of his student jobs, and things moved very quickly, and eventually they got married and they had two kids. And it's also worthy to know that they also got married in 1987. Not long after getting married, they had their first child, the first daughter of the two girls they had. And for a moment, it looked like things were finally falling into place for Charles Cullen. He had a family, a stable career, and everything from the outside. So it seemed everything seemed normal. But unfortunately, Adrian began to notice things weren't so normal behind closed doors. Colin's behavior started getting more erratic, more strange, disturbing even. Let me give you an example. He was always cruel to the family dogs. He would tie them up to a pole and leave them outside for hours, whether it was pouring rain or scorching sun. Who does that? It was one thing to be a bad pet owner, but it's also neglect on another level. And this wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. Oh, yeah, it was the tip of the iceberg, obviously. Because Adrienne also noticed that more unsettling things happened. So she decided to file a restraining order against Charles Cullen because she was terrified. She truly believed that he might harm her and their daughters. In her filings, she made some serious claims. She stated that Cullen had done things like spike people's drinks with lighter fluid, burn his daughter's books, and even leave his daughters with a babysitter for an entire week without informing no one. Cullen, of course, denied it all. He said that Adrian was exaggerating, but the fact that this accusation exists even speaks volume to the kind of person he is. Whether or not you believe every detail, there's no denying that Cullen's behavior was becoming more and more alarming. And if you thought that things would get worse, here is where the real darkness begins. The same year that he graduated from nursing school, which was in 1987, Cullen began working at St. Barnabas Medical Center. And this, unfortunately, is where his killing spree started. On June 11, 1988, he administered lethal overdose of intravenous medication to a patient, his first known mother, and to the first mother that he admitted to. This was just the beginning, because he would later confess to killing several more patients at St. Barnabas Hospital, including killing an AIDS patient by giving him a deadly overdose of insulin. By January 1992, the hospital began to catch on that something wasn't right in the hospitals. Why are the patients, suddenly just giving up? Patients that are apparently healthy. They started investigating after finding contaminated IV bags, and Cullen, sensing the walls closing in, left St. Barnabas immediately before they could dig in any deeper. But the same damage was already done. I mean, he already killed patients, and before he could, discover how easy it was for someone like him to exploit a system meant to save life, he had already left. And from this point, things even got worse because Charles Cullen went to other hospitals and continued his killing spree. It's crazy to think how Charles Cullen managed to get away with what he was doing for so long. Even when suspicions started to pop in about his involvement in patient deaths, no one really investigated him or held him accountable. Because instead of digging deeper, hospitals would let him quietly resign the moment any concerns surfaced. They were so scared of being held accountable or, basically anything that would bring lawsuit to their hospital. So they would always turn a blind eye and pass the problem along to other hospitals, obviously. And because of that, he just kept finding new jobs because nurses were in demand. Nurses are still in demand though. It's like no one wanted to deal with the mess, so they just let him slip through the cracks over and over again. 1 month after leaving St. Barnabas, Cullen took a job at Warren Hospitals in Phillipsburg, where he unalived 3 elderly women with overdoses of hard medication, digoxin. His final victim said that in a quote, a sneaky male nurse had injected her as she slept. However, family members and healthcare providers at the time dismissed her comments as unfounded and ignored the complaint, which is a very, very wrong thing to do as a medical professional. You always have to listen to your patient's complaints. So the following year, Cullen ended up moving into a dingy apartment in Phillipsburg because his wife initiated a divorce. And let me tell you, it was not a pretty split. His wife had had enough. She couldn't stand him any longer, especially his bizarre and downright creepy behavior. I mean, can you imagine living with someone like that? Someone that spikes your drinks, that burns your child's books, and leaves the pets outside for days. I mean, nobody could blame her, right? It was like the warning signs were all there, and she probably felt like she was living with a stranger. She was living with a ghost. She was living with a serial killer. So, I mean, they eventually had to divorce, and he left her and then settled in an apartment. And it just makes me wonder, like, how did no one piece it together that early? Charles later claimed that he had wanted to quit nursing in 1993, but the court ordered that he continued paying his child support, so he had no option than to continue working. In March of 1993, things even took a more darker turn with Cullen. He actually broke into his co-worker's house while she and her young son were asleep. You can imagine how creepy and how horrifying that could be. I mean, he didn't wake them up. He just slipped into her house, looked at them, and then went out. I really don't know why he did that. But after that, he started stalking her, which is like next level terrifying and next level creepy. Anyways, she was so freaked out that she had to report Cullen to the police. When he finally caught up to him, he pleaded guilty to trespassing and got off with just 1 year of probation. I mean, probation, that was just it. That's not enough in my own opinion. Anyways, things kept on getting brushed under the rug. And here's the thing, the day after he was arrested, he made another self-destructive attempt on his life. It's like his whole life was spiraling out of control, but no one was really looking at the bigger picture of what was going on with him. So after all this chaos, Colin decided to take 2 months off from work. During that time, he was treated for depression at two different psychiatric hospitals. But by the end of the year, he had already begin or tried to take his own life two more times. It's like no matter how what kind of treatment he was getting, he was still spiraling into depression and mental devaluation. Then in September, a 91-year-old cancer patient at Warren Hospitals actually reported something really concerning. Cullen, who wasn't even assigned to her, had come into her room and injected her with a needle. Imagine how terrifying it would have been for that old woman and, being unable to do something to help yourself. I mean, it was very, very sad. And unfortunately, the next day, she lost her life just like that. Her son wasn't even buying it eventually. He protested, saying that her death didn't feel natural because the mom complained. And honestly, I don't blame him. And I mean, I would have done the same if I were in his shoes. Eventually, the hospital decided to administer a lie detector test, and Colin and other nurses passed it. And I'm really curious, like, how does this lie detection test work? How is that even possible when you are hiding something? I mean, if you know, please tell me in the comment section down below. I would really, really appreciate it. Anyways, the widest part is that after all this, Colin just went right back into work at Collins Hospital because he wasn't found guilty, so he had no reason not to continue working. I mean, he just started working like nothing happened, whereas he already took the life of a 91-year-old patient. He stayed there until the following spring, and at this point, you might be really wondering, how did no one see what was going on? How did no one have an inkling of what was going on? I mean, it was just like every red flag was completely ignored, and it kept on, going on, and nobody noticed anything, or probably they noticed, but they weren't really interested in, getting to the root of the matter. After bouncing from one hospital to another, Colin ended up working in an intensive care unit at Hunterdon Medical Center in Flemington, New Jersey. Now he claimed that his two first years there, he didn't harm anyone. Allegedly, we don't know if this is true, but that was what he said. But here's the thing: the hospital's record from that period were destroyed by the time of his arrest in 2003, so no one could really confirm. I mean, it's convenient for him to say he didn't kill anyone because there is no evidence. I mean, we would never eventually know for sure, but all we know is that through January and September of 1996, Cullen confessed to killing 5 more patients, again using overdoses of injections like digoxin, epinephrine, and insulin. After Hunterdon, he moved to Morristown Memorial Hospital, but he didn't even last long there because he was fired for poor performance. I don't know, he wasn't working as he should. I don't know why. And this was a recurring theme for Charles Cullen's life. Everywhere he went, he came with one trouble or the other. And unfortunately, the hospital, instead of them doing something, they just passed him, to the next hospital just to avoid problem and endangering the life of their patient. Anyways, he became unemployed for about 6 months, and he stopped making child support payments, and eventually he ended up in the emergency room at Warren's Hospital seeking treatment for depression. And from there he left briefly, and he was admitted to a psychiatric facility, but like every other time, he was quickly released. In February 1998, Cullen found another job, this time at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I don't even know how he kept getting hired at this point, but I guess he was probably a good nurse, or he had the qualifications. Liberty was a ward for patients who were dependent on respirators, people who were incredibly vulnerable, and well, you can already see where this is going. In February 1998, Cullen found another job, this time at Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was admitted into a Liberty ward for patients that were dependent on respirators and people that were incredibly vulnerable, and well, as you can tell, he wasn't supposed to be there, and you know where this is going. So Cullen started giving patients drug and at unscheduled times, and things escalated when he was caught entering a patient's room with syringes in his hand. Creepy, right? Not too creepy for a nurse, but creepy for going into a patient's room at an unscheduled hour. The patient eventually ended up with a broken arm. Now think about that. A patient vulnerable, defenseless, ends up with a broken arm while Cullen is in the room. Did the patient try to fight back? Did they realize Cullen was up to no good and try to stop him? We can only guess, but it's a terrifying thought if you ask me. Not long after, there was a patient's death at Liberty's hospital, and you guessed it, Cullen was the prime suspect. But for some reason, he was let out, and another nurse was blamed for it. So Cullen eventually managed to slip away again, like a shadow no one could quite pin down. This was where things started to feel like a horror story. From one hospital to another, deaths piling up, and Cullen kept finding work. You can imagine a serial killer kept finding work, keep on killing his patients, people that he was supposed to be taking care of. I guess hospitals were too afraid of legal trouble or too desperate for nurses, because remember, there was a national nursing shortage at the time. There was no real reporting system in place either, so instead of facing the consequences, Colin just kept hopping from one job to another, leaving a trail of death behind him. A horrifying experience, if you might say. By November 1998, he landed at Eastern Hospital, and sure enough, on December 30th of that year, he murdered another patient. A coroner's test showed lethal amount of digoxin in the patient's blood, but here's the kicker. Eastern Hospital did an internal investigation and nothing. The evidence wasn't conclusive enough to blame Cullen, so they moved on like nothing happened, and so did he. Then in March of 1999, Cullen got a job at Lehigh's Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest, and he worked in the burn unit. And you know what happened? He killed another patient and attempted to kill someone else. But in April, just a month later, he voluntarily decided to resign. I don't know why. Maybe he sensed that the walls were closing in again, or maybe he was just moving on to his next target in another hospital. Either way, he just didn't stop. By now, it was clear Cullen was exploiting every loophole in the system. His next stop was at St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Cullen started working in the cardiac care unit, and for the next 3 years, he quietly killed at least 5 patients and attempted to kill 2 others. And let me tell you this, his personal life was just as chaotic and as dark as his professional life, because in January 2000, he tried to kill himself yet again. This time, he lit a charcoal grill in his bathtub, hoping to die from carbon monoxide poisoning. But then, his neighbors inhaled the smoke and called the fire department, and for some reason, Cullen was saved. He was taken to a hospital and then to a psychiatric facility, but once again, he was released the very next day. It is like every red flag that he exhibited was ignored, like every opportunity to intervene was just missed, just like that. Fortunately and suddenly, this story takes an unprecedented twist. While at St. Luke's Hospital, one of Cullen's co-worker made a discovery and finally raised alarm. Thank God. They found a medication vial in a disposal bin. Now, for context, just in case you don't know what a vial is, it is a small glass or a plastic container that stores drugs, often in liquid or powdery form. This drug these drugs Cullen had stolen weren't even valuable outside the hospital. They weren't for recreational drugs, you know what I mean? So why would someone, take the drugs? It was very suspicious. And that was when the hospital started digging and they discovered Cullen had been stealing the medication. And Luke's hospitals confronted him and basically gave him a choice. Resign quietly and get a neutral recommendation, or to be fired. So Cullen chose to just resign, and he was escorted out of the building in June 2002. But the story did not end there. 7 of his co-workers, 7, went to Lehigh Court District Attorney and reported their suspicions. They truly believe that Cullen has been using those drugs to kill patients. But the frustrating part is that the investigators didn't look into Cullen's past. They didn't connect the dots, because if they had, checked his work history and made inquiries, they would have found out that, sudden deaths happened in other hospitals and eventually being able to connect the dots. But they didn't. And 9 months later, the case was just dropped due to lack of evidence. Or was it due to neglect? Nobody knows. It's infuriating when you think about it. This man had a trail of suspicious deaths and alarming behavior behind him. But eventually, or unfortunately, hospitals kept covering it, moving along to avoid bad press or legal issues. No one was able to put the pieces together. Colin, unfortunately, was a ticking time bomb, and the system kept handing him more opportunities to do more harm. And trust me, the story isn't even yet. It's not even over. It gets darker from here. In 2002, September of 2002, Colin began working in a critical care unit of Somerset's Medical Hospital in Somerville, New Jersey. He then began dating a local woman around then, but his depression wasn't. Cullen had unalived at least 13 patients and attempted to kill at least one more by the mid of 2003 using digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine. So I decided to explain, briefly how these drugs can, kill a patient, especially when they are used at overdose. Digoxin is a medication used to treat heart problems like atrial fibrillation and heart failure. So what it does is that it helps the heart to beat more strongly and also regulate the heart rate. Basically, it helps the heart to pump better by increasing calcium levels in the cell, which improves the force of heart contraction. But the catch is it also slows down the heart rate by messing with the electrical signals in the heart. Now, if you take too much of digoxin, you can end up with something called digoxin toxicity, which messes with the heart rhythm. This can lead to bradycardia, which is like low heart rate, which is exactly a slower heart rate, or arrhythmia. And this one in worst scenarios can lead to death. Before someone actually collapses, they might experience nausea, vomiting, confusion, and even things like seeing yellow or green halo effects around objects. And here's the kicker: Colin used the digoxin in a way that was very deadly, because even small doses can be fatal, especially if the patient is already in a vulnerable state. Then there is epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. When they say your adrenaline is kicking, this one is used in emergencies like severe allergic reaction, asthma attacks, or even cardiac arrest. It basically stimulates the heart, raising the blood pressure and the heart rate. It helps to get the blood flowing, especially when the body is in distress and you need to do something, you need to take action as fast as you can. But when someone gets too much of epinephrine, it can overstimulate the heart, and that can cause severe arrhythmias, extremely high blood pressure, and can even cause the heart to stop abruptly. If the heart is already under stress, which was the case of most of his patients, too much epinephrine is really, really dangerous. And Collins seemed to know how to exploit that because he was a nurse. So he used it in a way that could cause fatal heart problems. And finally, we have the insulin, which is essential for people with diabetes. It helps to control blood sugar by lowering the glucose level in the bloodstream. Basically, insulin lets your cell take in sugar for energy or storage. But if you get too much insulin, it can drop the blood sugar dangerously, a condition known as hypoglycemia. If this happens, eventually the brain and the body gets deprived of energy, which comes from sugar or glucose, and then it could cause confusion, sweating, shaking, seizures, and coma, and even in worst cases, DEATH. The scary thing is that insulin overdose can actually happen very pretty quickly and quietly, making it a very sneaky way to harm patients who might already be weak or unresponsive. It is chilling how Colin used these drugs to his own advantage, knowing exactly how one could cause serious harm or even death, especially in patients who were already in fragile states. On June 18, 2003, he unsuccessfully attempted to murder a Somerset patient named Philip Gregor, who was later discharged and died 6 months later of natural causes. Some sets begin to notice Cullen's wrongdoing when he accessed the room and computerized records of patients who he wasn't assigned to. I mean, what was he doing there? A pharmacy staff at some sets, particularly a pharmacist named Tim Brown, noticed Cullen's frequent access to high-risk medication and documented irregularities with digoxin administration. The internal observation sparked a closer look at Cullen's action, albeit slowly, as the hospital administrators they hesitated to act. They were, in fact, they were uninterested. The hospital's computerized drug dispensing cabinet showed that he was requesting medication that his patient had not been prescribed. His drugs request included many others that were immediately cancelled, and they were cancelled within minutes of requesting each other. In July of 2003, the executive director of the New Jersey's Poison Information and Education System warned some sets of officials that at least 4 suspicious overdoses indicated the possibility that an employee was killing their patient. By October, Cullen had already killed at least 5 more patients and attempted to kill another. When a patient in Somerset died of low blood sugar in October of 2003, the hospital alerted the New Jersey police station because they were like, "What's going on? What's happening?" The patient was Cullen's final victim. State officials castigated the hospital for failing to report a non-fatal insulin overdose administered by Cullen in August. An investigation now began into his employment history, and it revealed that there were past suspicions about his involvement in patient deaths. Some said fired Cullen on October 31st of 2003 for lying on his job application. So there was a Somerset nurse, Amy Lauren, who was also a co-worker of Cullen, who had been friendly with him while they worked together at Somerset, as she alerted the police after she had become alarmed about Cullen's record of accessing drugs, and his links to patient deaths. The police kept him under surveillance for several weeks until they finished their investigation, and they pretended like, nothing happened. They needed to get some evidence and some facts before approaching him. Now, investigators assigned Lauren to visit Cullen after work hours and talk to him while she wore a wire. Unfortunately, fortunately, Cullen wasn't aware of this, so he splitted. He was just talking, and they had enough evidence and probable cause for arrest. Throughout his nursing career, Cullen displayed manipulative tendencies that allowed him to cover his tracks. He took advantage of the medical protocols, often selecting patients who were already critically ill and documenting his actions carefully to avoid suspicion. He primarily used medications like digoxin and insulin to induce cardiac events, knowing that they would be difficult to detect. His actions reflected a calculated, almost ritualistic approach to killing. Cullen later claimed that he acted out of mercy for the patients. Very, very laughable, you might say. He perceived them as suffering, and he decided to just help them end their life. I mean, that's very, very stupid to say, but experts argued that his motivations were they were much more complex than just trying to help the patient like he claimed. Suspected that he felt a compulsion to kill as a way of exerting control over life and death, and his rationale of mercy killing served as a justification that rather than a true motive. His actions indicated a fractured psychic where feelings of powerlessness and anger and the need for control over others emerged in a deadly way. Cullen's personality profile also revealed traits associated with psychological disorders. He played deep-seated rage, social detachment, and a troubling lack of empathy. Many believe that he may have developed an antisocial personality disorder, given his apparent lack of remorse and manipulative behavior. His repeated self-destructive attempts and actions suggested a complex interplay of self-loathing, inferiority, and a need to feel significant, hence having the need to unalive patients who were under his care. One of the most shocking aspects of Cullen's story is how many times he avoided accountability. The healthcare system, plagued by weak reporting protocols and unwillingness to confront potential liability, allowed him to move from one institution to another. His colleagues, while they were alarmed by his behavior, either did not report his concerns or just ignored it when they saw, trickling red flags. His journey through different hospitals illustrates a chilling failure of oversight, allowing a killer to operate unchecked within the healthcare facility. Cullen's pattern of crime was methodical and chilling. He exploited hospital systems over his 16-year career to administer lethal doses of medication, primarily targeting vulnerable patients in critical care. Cullen would often add these medications in the patient's IV bags or directly administer it to them, relying on the typical chaos of intensive care environments to hide the cause of the death. It would look like it's a seemingly natural phenomenon or natural complication of already existing health issues. So Collins' killing spree actually started way back in 1987 at St. Barnabas Medical Care Center, where his first victim, a known judge, died in 1988. People started to get suspicious because there were rumors about IV bags that were being contaminated, which led to Colin leaving the hospital, but that was just the beginning. In 1993, he moved to Warren Hospital where he got involved in the death of a cancer patient named Helen Dean. That raised some major red flags, but somehow it didn't lead to any criminal investigation. Then he made his way up to Hunterdon Medical Center, where it's likely that he killed even more patients, although we can't say for sure exactly how many. From there, Colin went to Morristown Memorial Hospital, where he later admitted to killing even more patients. But once again, there was no investigation after he left. Eventually, Colin came into Liberty Nursing Rehabilitation Center, where he mothered a patient named Francis Henry and was later linked to another death over there. 1998, Cullen had already moved to Eastern Hospital where he was associated with the death of a man named Otmash Graham. Sorry if I'm murdering the name. But as usual, no charges were ever brought against him. So from there, he went to Lehigh Valley Hospital in 1999 where suspicions were growing because he likely killed multiple patients. But once again, he avoided any kind of accountability. Things didn't slow down at all at St. Luke's Hospital between 2000 to 2002. He thought to have caused at least 6 deaths there, but like others, no one reported anything to the authorities. Finally, Colin landed at Somerset Medical Center from 2002 to 2003, and that was where things became really escalated. The hospital saw his highest death toll with more than a dozen suspicious fatalities. Thankfully, his colleague, Amy Lauren, started to raise alarms and an investigation was launched which eventually led to Cullen's arrest in 2003. It's just mind-blowing how he moved from hospital to hospital, leaving a trail of death behind him and somehow kept avoiding justice for all that time. The investigations and capture of Charles Cullen involved a significant shift from an initial suspicion within the hospital system to a full criminal inquiry led by the law enforcement agencies. Cullen's ultimate confession and capture came after years of overlooked red flags, culminating in a coordinated effort by Somerset Medical Center staff and detectives to expose his pattern of patient murders. After months of delay, Somerset's administrator contacted a local police, who in turn brought detectives from New Jersey State Police and Somerset County Prosecutor Office. These authorities officially began investigating Cullen in October 2003. Using pharmacy database records from the hospital's MedStation system, investigators traced a pattern of Cullen's suspicious drug withdrawals. They discovered that he had withdrawn medication then immediately cancelled the order, an action that allowed him to obtain drug without raising direct alarms. This cancellation indicated an attempt to cover his tracks. In hospital surveillance, once the police were involved, they worked discreetly with Somerset Medical Center staff to monitor Cullen's activity. Though there were no formal undercover operation within the hospital staff acted upon police guidance to track his behavior and gather enough evidence documenting his movement and drug orders. Several colleagues were instrumental in identifying Cullen's suspicious behavior. Pharmacists carefully documented every irregular drug request Cullen made, and they alerted the police to these activities. This ongoing collaboration between the hospital staff and the police provided investigators with vital insights into Cullen's method of assessing and misusing medication. By comparing the timing of patient deaths to Cullen shifts and drug access logs, police were able to establish a clear pattern linking him to the overdoses. Findings confirmed suspicions and enabled the police to move forward with a criminal case. With a mounting case built on drug access records, patient deaths and colleague testimonies, this detective arrested Cullen on December 12th, 2003. The arrest occurred at a restaurant after he had agreed to meet with the detectives, unaware that they had already gathered enough evidence against him that which would lead him to be arrested for. Cullen was initially charged with one count of murder and one count of attempted murder based on the evidence from some sets. However, investigators believe that they were only the tip of the iceberg. Following his arrest, Cullen initially showed reluctance to cooperate with the law enforcement agencies, giving vague responses and avoiding direct admissions. However, he ultimately agreed to cooperate under certain conditions, which included avoiding the death penalty. He was truly really smart. Cullen's attorney, Johnny Mask, helped negotiate with the prosecutors. Cullen's plea deal guaranteed that he would not face the death penalty if he confessed to all the crimes that he committed and assisted investigators in uncovering further details of his actions across multiple hospitals. Cullen's confession was extensive. He admitted to killing up to 40 patients, though investigators believe that true numbers could be closer to 400, given the volume of unexplained death during his career. He provided chilling details of his method, explaining how he administered lethal doses of medications to patients, both terminal and non-terminal, who he claimed he was relieving from their suffering. In his confession, Cullen cited a desire to ease patient suffering, yet his explanation conflicted with the fact that many of his victims were not even near death or critically killed. So why are you trying to, help them or ease them from suffering when they were already on their path to recovery? His motive remains somewhat ambiguous, with psychological assessments suggesting a complex mixture of control, compassion, and mental instability. There was no trial because Cullen accepted a plea deal and provided full confessions. His case didn't go to trials, sparing the victim's family from prolonged legal process and just reliving the whole event again. He pleaded guilty to numerous counts of murder and attempted murder across multiple counties in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. From March to December 2004, Cullen pled guilty to 22 murders and 6 attempted murder in New Jersey courts. He later pled guilty to an additional 7 murders in Pennsylvania. Cullen's behavior during his court appearances shocked many, as it seems indicative of someone that his mental state was, not truly where it's supposed to be. And he also exhibited lack of remorse. During one sentencing hearing, the families of the victims were allowed to make an impact statement. So basically, an impact statement is when the victims or their family talk about how the crime has affected them in their personal lives. So Cullen repeatedly disrupted the proceeding by muttering and shouting statements like, "Your Honor, you need to step down." His outbursts were so severe that the judge, Paul W. Armstrong, ordered bailiffs to physically gag Cullen with a cloth and a duct tape. This moment became widely reported and symbolized the deep emotions surrounding the case. Also, family of Cullen's victims spoke about their devastation and expressed their anger and grief. Many demanded to know why he did that, but Cullen couldn't provide any clear answers other than his claim of wanting to end patient suffering, which was already even out of the book because his patients were not about to die. His statement just contradicted the whole randomness of his action. On March 2nd, 2006, Cullen was formally sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences in New Jersey for the murder and attempted murders he committed. He was not eligible for parole for 397 years. Basically, that's for life. And in Pennsylvania, he was later given an additional 6 life sentences for his crimes over there. His confessions and cooperations as part of the plea deal solidified his sentencing and assured that he would spend his remaining years in prison. The judge condemned Cullen's action as horrific and noted the devastating impact on victims' family and the medical community as a whole. Cullen's case led to significant reforms in hospital practices, including a stricter tracking of the drug access, improved and automated drug dispensing system, and a mandatory reporting mechanisms for suspicious activities. Hospitals adopted protocols to report nursing and medical staff behavior to prevent similar incidents or experience from happening. His action highlighted major vulnerabilities within the healthcare, inspiring patient safety advocates to push for stronger oversight and regulatory standards, such as the creation of databases tracking healthcare worker complaints, job history, and disciplinary actions. Anyways, we have come to the end of today's video. If you liked the video you watched, please, I would appreciate if you give me a like, a thumbs up, kindly share, subscribe, and put something down in the comment section. I'll see you next time, and bye.